some of the main things that differentiate the present moment from earlier periods include obvious ones we know about, like the intensification of globalization. But in that intensification of globalization, an increased role for finance, that not just capitalism in general, but specifically financial capitalism, plays a huge role. There is a return of geopolitics that we're seeing in world conflicts, some of the kinds of mixture of political, cultural or civilizational, geographical issues that reflect old patterns from the past, but we did not see during the Cold War. The Cold War in many ways blocked this kind of geopolitics that has come back since the end of the Cold War. We see it in the fighting in Syria and Iraq and that whole region now in Ukraine and so forth. There is a new issue of the rise of informal but large-scale capitalism. When we think of informal sector, we often think of small operators who are using cash economy in the favelas or something like that. But there is giant scale, illicit, unrecorded capitalism moving huge amounts of money, linked of course to narco-trafficking or arms trafficking or human trafficking, but not only that, just outside the bounds. And this is much larger than it was before and changed. The current era is also shaped by environmental issues to a degree that we have not seen before. Climate change, but also water resources and other resources, issues of pollution and degradation of local neighborhoods, questions of environmental justice, who benefits and who loses in relation to the environment. These are big new issues. Finally, I stress that we have an issue of institutional deficits, that many of the institutions through which people manage the risks in their ordinary lives have been damaged or have lost financing or are in trouble in one way or another, and building or strengthening institutions that will be able to help people solve the problems in their lives is a big issue all around the world now. So they definitely influenced various international experiences. In the case of the Horn of Africa, there were several things that I realized about society that I had not realized from the books that I had read. Now, partly I had not read the right books, and I then went and looked for others. But, for example, when I was first in Sudan in the early 1980s, one of the lessons that it brought to me was the importance of physical infrastructure. And social science has not paid a lot of attention to physical infrastructure, roads, electricity, that change social life, that change how people can work or not, and that change the interconnections between different parts of a country. At the time I was there, Sudan had one paved intercity road in the whole country. It also then raised an awareness of a different issue, is how much we go by statistics like gross domestic product. We use GDP to measure levels of development. At the time that I was there, Sudan had a GDP that was fairly close, a little bit below Malaysia, in the Asia. Egypt had a GDP almost exactly the same as China. The GDP was grossly misleading. Even then, Egypt was not in a comparable position to China. But that's partly because GDP doesn't count historical inheritances, like the fact that China had a network of roads throughout the whole country, the education level that China had achieved in the country, the health of the population, which was better in China then. So it made me realize that the surface indicators we use to say who is low income, middle income, are misleading. It's very analogous to these debates on inequality that have centered on Thomas Piketty's book, Capital in the 21st Century, where one of Piketty's key points is the difference between income and wealth. But the same thing applies to countries, that by knowing the current income, you don't know the underlying wealth of the country. And that became very important. A last thing I would say from the Horn of Africa, even more from both Sudan and from living in Eritrea and elsewhere, is the importance of communities and societies below the level of the nation state and across nation states. So this is a region in which you really have to think of the region to understand anything. The whole region is in a complex interrelationship, and every country is determined by its neighbors, in part, in which there are refugee flows across borders and military incursions and labor flows across borders that shape things so much, in which the both so-called tribal groups and regional communities are very strong, and language communities, and that it's not clear how people will identify. And I'll give you an example from the Sudan, where I worked at the Constitutional Commission, and there was a proposal that there should be national languages that recognized all of the different major nationalities, the next level down. So the people who are Tigray, or the people who are Saho, and so forth. And there was a proposal from the a protest from the Saho people against making Saho a language of education and nationality. But that's strange. And why? Of course, people always want their own language, don't they? And the answer was no. They felt if children were educated in Saho, their opportunities would be so blocked in economic conditions that it would amount to keeping them always in an underdeveloped state. So they were demanding education in Arabic. They said, we're Muslims, we want education in Arabic. We don't want it in Tigrinya, the other national language that was spoken by Christians, but we do want it in an international language because we think our children will have more opportunities if they learn Arabic. They can always learn Saho at home. And that kind of thing is just an example, but it's made me realize how complicated the relationship between different identities at different scales is. And we often sort of just assume that the primary identity people have will be the one they want in every way, and it's not true.